This is Building Tomorrow, the Society of Construction Law Australia podcast.
On the show, you'll hear real conversations about what matters most to the people behind the scenes who are shaping Australian construction.
From lawyers and contract administrators to engineers, commercial managers, consultants, and all the other experts forging the future of Australian infrastructure today. I'm Mawuna Matanda.
I'm BJ Lomsal.
And I'm Jennifer Raphael. We're back with another episode from the 2025 SoCLA conference. Today, we are exploring what Brisbane 2032 can learn from decades of Olympic Games and major infrastructure projects. From takeaways from past games to unpacking delivery models that could keep Brisbane on track. For our first guest, I was joined by Jane Hyder, a partner at King Wood Mallesons, who focuses on construction law and infrastructure project delivery. Jane shares with us lessons from major infrastructure projects and what they might mean for Brisbane 2032. She also discusses delivery approaches, financing considerations, and what will be important as planning moves into the next phase. Let's jump in. Jane, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here.
Jane, you spoke on a panel yesterday about what we can learn from renewables and transition projects for the Brisbane Olympics. Can you explain to us why these renewables and transmissions projects are very relevant for the Brisbane Olympics and the types of projects that we'll see?
So what we felt was that over the last 10 to 15 years in the energy transition in Australia, there have been quite a large number of challenges that project proponents and developers have had to face, including supply chain challenges, resourcing constraints, very strict and tight deadlines and budgetary constraints. And as a result of those factors, the energy transition industry, for want of a better word, has had to innovate away from some of the more traditional forms of contracting like EPC to different models like the disaggregated model and the incentivised target cost model. So we felt that the Brisbane Olympics had similar challenges around timing, cost constraints, around resourcing constraints, supply chain issues, and a range of other issues. We therefore thought that we could take some learnings from those delivery models used in the energy transition and potentially apply those learnings to the utilisation of these delivery models for the Olympics.
Absolutely, because it sounds as though a lot of the challenges faced in those types of projects are going to be faced when it comes to the Brisbane Olympics as well. Part of your paper and presentation is you spoke about the definition of project success. Why is that particularly important to define that at the outset?
So we think that project success is an entirely subjective concept, essentially. And for one person, it might be about coming in under budget. For another person, it might be keeping stakeholders happy. For another project, it might be all about getting sustainable outcomes. For another project, it might be entirely driven by program and timing, which I think we probably would all agree is going to be critical for the Olympics. We think that as part of developing an appropriate delivery model and procurement strategy, that you need to identify which aspect of project success you want to focus on, because you can't have everything. There is no perfect project, that is just the reality. And if you are going to, for example, focus on program and timing, then that will potentially guide the delivery model that you choose.
Absolutely. And so when it comes to something like the Brisbane Olympics, obviously time is something which is going to be critical. There won't be a delay. We've got a hard deadline that we have to meet, which comes into play when we're thinking about what delivery models we're going to be using. You mentioned before about the incentivized target cost models, and your paper suggests that some of these models may be suitable for some of the different types of Olympic projects that will be on offer. Could you briefly explain, somebody who's not familiar with ITC models, just what it is and why it might be relevant for the Brisbane Olympics?
Essentially, the ITC model is a merger of what you might consider to be the best aspect of project alliance delivery and the best aspects of design and construction. There are 2 or 3 key components. The first key component is that delivery is essentially split into 2 phases. And in the first phase, the parties will work together collaboratively to develop design and come up with what is called a target outturn cost. That stage is very similar to another type of delivery that's very often used in the construction industry at the moment, called early contractor involvement. And the simple point there is that you get the contractor on board early, you pay the contractor, and not always, but it's unreasonable to expect the contractor to do these kinds of things for free. You pay the contractor to spend a good 2 or 3 months working on the design, understanding the project a bit better, and the rationale for that is that the contractor will be in a better position to price the job. So that's aspect number 1. Aspect number 2 is that the pricing model based on a target outturn cost is indeed just a target, and there is a pain share and gain share model built into the ultimate cost of the project. If you come in under the target outturn cost, then you will share in the savings, for want of a better way to describe it. And if you come in over, then that will give rise to some kind of pain share, which the contractor and the, in this case, geeker, would share in. So that kind of pricing flexibility puts a little bit less pressure on contractors to commit to a fixed cost, which, as we've learned with the Olympics, can be very, very challenging. Third aspect is that once the target outturn cost is provided, the party can engage the contractor to move into the delivery phase. That is actually optional, and if the pricing doesn't work, then you can terminate the arrangement with the contractor. The elements of the design and construct type contract will then kind of feed into the delivery phase, and that will import some hard concepts like fitness for purpose and achievement of delivery within a particular time frame. Why we think that might work for the Olympics is that a number of the projects have quite sophisticated and complicated design components. The stadia would be a really good example. I think there are 2 or 3 or 4 that are either going to be built new or refurbished. There are lots of stakeholder inputs into those designs that will be required. One very basic example is that the IOC has design requirements, they have to be met. So rather than just launching into some kind of design and construct arrangement where the contractor is taking on all design and construct risk on what might be considered to be quite an ignorant basis, it seems to make logical sense to us to spend a good few months developing the design properly, with the hope that once we get to delivery, having the contractor and all of the key stakeholders participate in that early design phase, you're ironing out a lot of the issues that might otherwise arise during construction and lead to cost blowouts.
Yes, hopefully. Fingers crossed. You also presented on the disaggregated delivery model, and your paper seemed to suggest that it offers benefits for managing the supply chains, something which is likely going to be critical for Brisbane given the current market constraints. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, certainly. So that model probably gained popularity in renewable energy projects about 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, and it was driven by a refusal on the part of many contractors in the renewable project sector to take on what we might call a full wrapped risk for delivery of a project. In particular, these EPC contractors were unhappy about taking on risk of delivery of the plant. So if you think about a wind farm, there is a turbine component, and solar farm, you can think about inverters and panels and all of that. And contractors were taking the position that those kinds of equipment supply aspects of the work should be better procured by and managed by the principal or the developer, and the contractors were prepared to take responsibility for the rest of the delivery of the work. So it's kind of splitting it out into supply and install in one sense. That has led to a couple of outcomes, and it does depend a little bit in the renewable industry who you are speaking to about the success of that kind of delivery model. But the contractors would say it enabled them to focus on doing what they're really good at, and it cut down on the margin or layer of profit and margin that might be put on the equipment supply. Against that, there are interfaces that need to be dealt with. So anytime you split a particular piece of work into more than one packages, you have to deal with how those packages will interface with each other. In the context of the Olympics, which, to bear in mind, the Olympics will be a program of works. It will be dozens and dozens and dozens of projects, but there are some similarities across projects. So there might be, for example, substations that are required to upgrade power supply to a range of Olympics infrastructure. It might make sense, rather than asking the stadium contractor to take responsibility for delivery of a substation, and this is just a very basic example, it might make more sense for GECA to take on the supply risk of certain key elements of equipment, particularly when there's going to be more than one required, and just manage that itself. That would enable it to do early ordering, so you don't need to wait for the engagement of the contractor to procure those items. You can just get on with it now. And it will also give GECA more control over the process. There are a couple of other examples in stadia that you might think about, like chairs, a whole lot of other things that are going to need to be basically bulk purchased. And we think that the disaggregated model might be a reasonably good template to utilise for certain aspects of the Olympics program.
We've obviously know that every Olympic previously has had cost and budget blowouts. And I think you mentioned in your presentation about the need for private investment, particularly in relation to the athletes' village, which seems to be that the government will be looking for some investment around there. What are your views on the appetite for this in the current market?
Very interesting question. I think that my clients who are involved in delivery of projects on a PPP basis, which is of course always privately financed, are looking at the Olympics with keen enthusiasm. One of the challenges has been that GECA has only very recently been stood up, and the procurement strategy and the way in which the various packages will be delivered is still unclear. And I think what we've heard over the last couple of days is that the budget allowance for delivery of all of these packages is not going to be enough. So I think that we can assume that private finance will be required for at least certain components of the work. And as you say, the athletes' villages would make sense, particularly if they can be retrofitted into accommodation, which could provide an income stream to a sponsor. So my clients are keen. They're also keen to explore opportunities with I think it's called the Brisbane Stadium, tentatively, which is going to be the home to the Brisbane Lions, but I hope I've not misunderstood that detail. One of the difficulties is going to be ensuring that the delivery model selected maximises the ability of private finance to participate. So financiers are very conservative. They like a model that is tried and tested. They all understand PPPs. They know how that works. They know how to price and size the finance and the risk. ITC models are a little bit untested in the market in terms of private finance. The only example that I'm aware of is the North East Link in Melbourne, which has a component of an ITC and also has private finance. The reason it's challenging is because under an ITC model, you don't necessarily have complete certainty on the actual cost of the work because it's not a fixed price lump sum. That therefore throws a little bit of a spanner in the works in terms of the delivery model that is selected. But what we tried to think about in our paper was the way in which tweaks can be applied to the models to give a sufficient level of certainty to enable private finance to participate. And we're pretty confident that that can be achieved with forethought and planning.
Absolutely. And then looking ahead, what advice would you give to Geeka as they begin the procurement process?
When we think about the resource constraints in the construction sector, what contractors need more than anything is certainty of timing so that they can plan their pipeline appropriately. What that means in terms of Geeka is I would recommend they do market testing, market engagement, be very, very clear on the pipeline so that these contractors can scale up and put themselves in the best position possible in terms of their resourcing and their people and all of those other things that they are going to have to meet in order to be able to respond to the documents that are put out to market. What contractors don't like is uncertainty. They don't like things being changed at the last minute. So I would suggest to Geeka they pick a lane, they identify a high-level procurement strategy and they stick with it and they, as you say, just get on with it.
Absolutely, because I think it was said in one of the sessions, there's simply not enough human beings that we currently have in order to deliver all the projects necessary to meet these games. So absolutely resourcing is going to be such a critical issue.
Sounds like you've read my paper, thank you.
Yes, I have. I found it, really, really fascinating. So thanks so much for joining us on the show, Jane.
That's my pleasure. Nice to meet you.
Lovely to meet you. Next up, Moana spoke to Nicole Whitby, or Nikki, and Colin Fraser. Nicole is a construction and engineering lawyer and partner at Pinsent Masons, and Colin is also a lawyer and partner at Pinsent Masons. Nicole and Colin share big picture lessons from past Olympics and what they suggest for Brisbane's path ahead. They explore what makes the project at hand so complex and what makes it different from a normal infrastructure endeavour. Let's jump in.
Colin and Nikki, thank you so much and welcome to the show.
We're delighted to be doing this.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you both for a very interesting discussion about the Olympic Games since 2012 and things we can learn. During your research, which looked really intensive, what are some of the interesting things that you learned?
I loved getting into the work of Professor Flieberger, who wrote How Big Things Get Done, but has also authored a lot of papers which look at the costs of hosting the Olympic Games and draws comparisons and sets out why that has been the case. And then some of the factors, so eternal beginner syndrome, that it moves around each city, the blank check syndrome. And I think the way that he presents that work is very digestible. And I loved learning about Colin's experience with London.
And what were the highlights for you, Colin, in terms of your research? What was new and interesting?
I was struck by, if I can put it this way, how bad the record of the Olympics is. Because a lot of the projects are the sort of projects that the industry delivers all the time. So what is it that's different about Olympics? So if Olympic Games tend to have a worse track record than new build nuclear power, is a real surprise to me.
Touching on that point, you both talked about 6 structural elements that lead, and you're saying why are Olympics unique? And I think one of them was that sort of fixed deadline that really gives you little room to maneuver. Can you just talk us quickly through what those 6 structural risks are?
Sure. So the first one is that eternal beginner syndrome that I mentioned.
What does that mean? Because that's a very interesting term.
So what it means is that a feature of the Games is that the IOC like to move the Games around the world. So everyone gets a turn. But that means that the time between Games in any one place will be a long time. So, Sydney was in 2000 and then Brisbane's going to get it in 2032. So that means that there's not the experience necessarily to draw on in those places. We talk more in our paper about where you can go and get that experience. But that's what eternal beginner means. It's a product of the Games, moving around.
At least a couple of other factors you thought were important.
Yeah, it's the long planning window of the Games is another one. So there's a long period of time, 7 to 11 years between being announced as a host to the Games actually taking place. And the length of that time, you'll see changes of government, different business cycles. That is risky. That means that things can happen, unexpected events can happen like COVID, which meant, that the Tokyo Games had to move by a year. So that's another risk factor that is unique to the Games in some sense. The fixed deadline that I think you mentioned. So the opening ceremony is going to take place in July in Brisbane in 7 years' time. And that doesn't change. And it's a hard deadline, which in construction means the deadline and timing is critically important, but it means that you can't play with it and use it as a bargaining chip, which only leaves you with cost to play with, because quality, you also can't play with it because the IOC and all the sports associations have strict requirements around how venues are to be constructed and how facilities are to be presented. So that means then the last one is a blank check syndrome. So a host city just has to pay for the games.
Colin, you talked about the 12 observations you've seen or that you two have studied about the Olympics. Which of these do you think is probably the most crucial or relevant for Brisbane?
There's several that are relevant and important. I think one of the issues underpinning the approach of GICA, the delivery authority for the Games, is to repurpose existing facilities insofar as possible. That's partly environmental, no doubt, and therefore it's a laudable aim. But as anyone who's bought a new build house versus renovating an old one knows, is so susceptible to the condition of the existing house or the existing sports arena in this case. So I think the proportion of repurposing that GICA intends to do is going to make delivery of those projects especially susceptible to the condition of the existing site. And so the way to tackle that, to bring certainty to those particular projects, is to understand the condition of the site. So spending time surveying and investigating and understanding the condition of the existing facility is time well spent. It might be frustrating because it's not a very good headline where investigating the existing facility is unexciting, but it brings certainty to the delivery program. And once you get going, there's much less change and much less risk, and predictability and certainty of the delivery is improved.
And I like that quote you had up there about thinking slow and then acting fast, because I think there is that pressure to be seen to be doing something and anything. And sometimes that's not always the best thing.
Well, that's not ours. We nicked that, didn't we?
That's good.
That's the professors.
It's very good.
Yeah. So there's the saying that if you give me 5 minutes to chop the tree, I'll spend the first 4 sharpening the axe.
I like that saying. And Nikki, you talked a bit about early market engagement for Brisbane. What would that look like in practice, do you think?
Well, in practice, I think that means GICA, so the procuring authority, letting the market know what it's planning to build. And it has done that very recently with its March 2025 report. So there's now certainty about what is to be built. Heck, that's fantastic. But we want to know how the government plans to deliver those, like what models is it going to use. What we do know is that for the stadium, which is the largest package, $3.1 billion, that they're planning to use PPP type model, and everyone is familiar with that model. It's been used widely. The next step is to understand how the other packages are to be delivered, and I think certainty is what industry is looking for as to how that will be procured, whether it's going to be a delivery partner, and Colin spoke a bit about that having been used in London. There could be multiple delivery partners. That's what people need to know.
Turning now to some of the dispute resolution and project success. You mentioned in your paper that London 2012 only had 2 adjudications and no litigation. Colin, what was the secret there?
I think initially some of the parties might have been cynical about whether the thirst for collaboration would actually be implemented in practice. But one of the things that underpinned the approach to those games was, rather than storing up the problem to the final account and resolving it at the end of the project, it would protect the project and the programme and the parties if issues could be flagged up early and resolved in real time. So you don't save up the debate, the dispute and the resolution of it until the final account. And the way in which they did that in London was to introduce in virtually every contract for the games this concept of the IDAP, the Independent Dispute Avoidance Panel. And that was a panel assembled and paid for by the principal, by the Olympic Delivery Authority, of august and respected experts in the construction community. It was non-binding, it was informal, it was well-informed because the panel of experts were briefed on the projects at the outset and in real time, and they would give their view on questions asked of the panel. And so it wasn't binding and it wasn't especially formal. But if you were one of the parties and you got a view from a very well-respected individual, you'd be quite brave to take it further. And so that was a real-time, inexpensive, but highly persuasive way of assisting the parties to understand where they stood and resolving the dispute in real time and avoiding formal dispute resolution that characterises so many other distressed mega projects.
Yeah, and as a front-end lawyer that specialises in PPPs, I really loved that idea of that panel. I was like, why don't we have these in more contracts, like in terms of not always going through that long, lengthy sort of dispute process. So yeah, that was a good point.
We're doing a lot of contracts. The acronym's different, but there's lots of contracts have escalation procedures or DABs or other, compared to litigation and arbitration, speedier, less costly and more informal procedures.
Nikki, what role do you think contract choices play in avoiding disputes? I mean, we've talked a bit about what the different options are. Do you think choosing something like an ITC would be beneficial in not having those overruns or making it more successful?
I think ITC and that more collaborative approach can certainly work as long as it stays true to the model. And so sometimes I think that some of those more collaborative styles of contract can get lost when it comes to notice regimes or how things are implemented.
I'm not sure if you were at yesterday's fireside chat, but they asked if you could choose one superstar to run the Olympics, delivery, and that whole sort of setting it up, who would you pick? A living person.
What a question.
Does it have to be a sports man or woman?
They said preferably not.
Oh.
But I'm open. I'll let you choose anyone as long as they're alive.
Barack Obama's got time in his hands.
He came to mind. That was my person, but I wasn't game to put his name down. So yes.
I like it.
He's a keen sports fan, I think.
Well, thank you so much. Obviously you've had a big day getting off that amazing panel discussion. So thank you for taking time out to have this chat.
Thank you very much, Moana, for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Building Tomorrow, the Society of Construction Law Australia podcast.
The Society of Construction Law Australia is a national organisation of members at all stages of their professional career with a shared interest in construction law.
For more info about the Society of Construction Law Australia, head to the website scl.org.au.
This show was produced with strategy and production support from Wavelength Creative.
To make sure you don't miss an episode of Building Tomorrow, be sure to subscribe to or follow the show in your podcast app.
And while you're there, leave us a 5-star review. It really helps others find the show. I'm Moana Matanda.
I'm Vijay Lamsal.
And I'm Jennifer Raphael. And we'll see you in the next episode of Building Tomorrow.